Hello there. Welcome to this peaceful journey through time as we explore the silent stone passages beneath ancient Jerusalem. If you're finding comfort in these historical whispers, I'd be so grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and subscribe to join our gentle community of history dreamers. I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it in your corner of the earth as these ancient stories float through your room? Perhaps you're drifting to sleep in Tokyo as dawn breaks over Jerusalem's stones, or maybe you're resting in California while the moon illuminates the very passages we'll explore together. As you settle in, let me ask you this. Have you ever wondered what secrets lie beneath your feet when you walk upon ancient ground? What whispered tales could the silent stone passages of Jerusalem tell us if only we could hear their ancient voices? In the soft shadows of history, beneath the bustling streets of Jerusalem, lies one of the most remarkable engineering feats of the ancient world, King Hezekiah's water tunnel. This narrow passage, carved through solid limestone nearly 3,000 years ago, still carries water today, its gentle current whispering stories of survival and ingenuity. As we begin our journey through Jerusalem's hidden underground world, I invite you to imagine yourself standing at the entrance of this ancient tunnel, feeling the cool air against your skin as it rises from the depths below. The tunnel stretches before you like a thread through time, connecting us to hands that worked by flickering oil lamps in the 8th century BCE. King Hezekiah ruled the kingdom of Judah during troubled times, when the mighty Assyrian Empire threatened Jerusalem's very existence. The city's vulnerability was clear to this thoughtful king. Its primary water source, the Gihon Spring, lay outside the protective city walls, leaving Jerusalem exposed in times of siege. Water, that most precious of resources, would determine whether life would continue within the city when enemies surrounded it. Hezekiah's solution was as daring as it was necessary, to channel the spring's waters through the heart of the bedrock hill upon which Jerusalem sat, bringing life-giving water safely inside the city walls. Imagine the workers of ancient Jerusalem, their hands rough from labor, their bodies illuminated by the gentle glow of oil lamps as they chiseled through the living rock. They worked from both ends of the planned tunnel, somehow managing to meet in the middle despite the lack of modern surveying equipment. We can almost hear the echoes of their tools against stone, a rhythmic percussion played across centuries, a melody of survival and hope. The limestone would have released its ancient scent with each strike, that particular earthy fragrance that only freshly cut stone can produce. The tunnel they created stretches for about 750 feet, winding its way through the darkness beneath Jerusalem's ancient hill. Its height varies, sometimes allowing a person to stand upright, other times requiring them to crouch or wade through shallow water. The walls bear the marks of their chisels, each strike a testament to human determination, each groove a silent witness to history. In some places, you can see how the two teams adjusted their course when they heard each other's approaching hammers, their paths bending to meet in that moment of connection that must have brought such joy and relief. Perhaps the most touching aspect of this ancient marvel is the inscription found near its midpoint, where the two tunneling teams met. Carved into the wall, this Salome inscription celebrates their achievement in ancient Hebrew script. Though now housed in a museum in Istanbul, we can still read their words. The tunneling was completed. While the stonecutters were wielding their axes, each man toward his fellow, there was heard a man's voice calling to his fellow. The stonecutters hacked toward each other, axe against axe, and the water flowed from the spring to the pool, a distance of 200 cubits. Can you imagine that moment of breakthrough? The muffled sounds of approaching picks growing louder, the excited calls echoing through the stone, and finally, that first small opening where light and voices could pass through. Human connection established through solid rock. The cool water that eventually flowed through this passage meant life for countless generations of Jerusalem's inhabitants, a silent gift from King Hezekiah that continued giving long after his reign ended. The tunnel itself is a testament to the ingenuity of ancient engineering. It maintains a gentle gradient of just 0.6% over its entire length, allowing water to flow slowly but steadily from the Gihon spring to the pool of Siloam within the city walls. This subtle incline, barely perceptible to those walking through the tunnel today, speaks to the remarkable skill of these ancient engineers working without modern tools or mathematical formulas. They understood the behavior of water, the properties of stone, and the geography of their beloved city. Walking through Hezekiah's tunnel today, as many visitors to Jerusalem do, is to participate in a ritual of connection with the ancient past. The cool water still flows around ankles and calves, just as it did for the citizens of Jerusalem preparing for the Assyrian siege. The darkness still envelops you as it did those ancient workers, though now electric lights often illuminate the path. The tunnel bends and winds, sometimes narrowing until shoulders brush against stone walls polished by countless hands over millennia. This is not merely an archaeological curiosity, it is a living monument to human resourcefulness in the face of existential threat. When the Assyrian king Sennacherib and his army surrounded Jerusalem in 701 BCE, the city survived in part because of this hidden lifeline. While other cities fell, Jerusalem endured, its people sustained by water flowing through this very passage. History records that Jerusalem outlasted the siege, though scholars debate exactly how and why Sennacherib withdrew his forces without conquering the city. The tunnel also connects us to the spiritual life of ancient Jerusalem. Water from the Gihon spring was used in temple rituals, particularly during the Feast of Tabernacles, when water was drawn in golden vessels and carried in procession to be poured out as an offering. The name Gihon itself appears in Genesis, named as one of the 4 rivers flowing from Eden. For the people of ancient Jerusalem, this wasn't merely a practical waterway, it connected them to their sacred stories and rituals. The pool of Siloam, where the tunnel's waters collected, features in biblical narratives as well. In the New Testament, it is described as the place where Jesus sent a blind man to wash his eyes and receive sight. These layers of meaning, practical, historical, spiritual, are characteristic of Jerusalem itself, where every stone seems to carry multiple significances across different traditions and times. The water flowing through Hezekiah's tunnel nourished not only bodies, but also a rich tapestry of belief and meaning. Perhaps what makes this ancient passage so fascinating is how it represents the unseen infrastructure that sustains civilizations. Much like our own modern cities rely on hidden networks of pipes, cables, and tunnels, ancient Jerusalem depended on these invisible pathways carved through stone. What appears solid and unchanging, the very bedrock of the city, was actually shaped and modified by human hands to serve human needs. The city above could only exist because of these secret arteries below. As we drift deeper into our exploration of Jerusalem's underground world, let us carry with us this image of water flowing silently through stone, connecting us to those who came before. Hezekiah's tunnel stands as a gentle reminder that beneath the visible structures of history often lie hidden passages of remarkable significance. Like dreams flowing through the quiet darkness of night, these ancient waters continue their journey, carrying whispers from a distant past. As the waters of Hezekiah's tunnel continue their ancient journey beneath Jerusalem, let us follow another underground path that takes us to the massive quarry caves lying silent beneath the old city. These vast chambers of hewn stone tell a different story, not of water's life-giving flow, but of the very birth of the city itself, known today as Zedekiah's cave or Solomon's quarries. This enormous underground complex stretches for nearly 5 acres, beneath the Muslim quarter of the old city. Here, in the cool darkness, we find the birthplace of Jerusalem's most iconic structures. Imagine standing in the main chamber of this subterranean world, where the ceiling soars 20 to 30 feet above your head. The air here is still and carries a slight mineral scent, the breath of ancient limestone. Soft golden light from modern fixtures casts gentle shadows across walls that bear the marks of countless chisel strikes. Each of these marks represents a human hand, a moment of focused labor, a contribution to something that would far outlive the worker who made it. The scale of the space is difficult to comprehend at first. It unfolds in a series of chambers and passages that seem to extend endlessly into the darkness. These quarries have been known by many names throughout their long history. The name Zedekiah's Cave comes from a tradition that King Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, used these tunnels to escape when Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians in 587 BCE. It's said that he was caught near Jericho after divine intervention caused his shadow to appear outside while he remained within the cave. Though this story belongs more to legend than history, it speaks to how these spaces have captured the imagination for millennia. The alternative name, Solomon's Quarries, connects the space to the first great builder king of Jerusalem. The stone extracted from these quarries is the famous Jerusalem limestone, or meleke, a name derived from the Arabic word for royal. This isn't merely poetic. This particular limestone truly is noble in its properties. It has a distinctive golden white color that seems to capture and hold the light of the setting sun, giving Jerusalem its characteristic glow at dusk. The stone is relatively soft when first cut, allowing for precise carving, but hardens with exposure to air, becoming durable enough to withstand centuries. It is quite literally the perfect building material, a gift from the earth beneath Jerusalem to the city above. Archaeological evidence suggests that these quarries were most extensively used during the Second Temple period, particularly during Herod the Great's massive building projects in the 1st century BCE. Herod, known for his architectural ambition and engineering prowess, transformed Jerusalem into a city that rivaled the great capitals of the Mediterranean world. The massive expansion of the Temple Mount, the construction of his palace, and numerous other structures throughout the city required tremendous amounts of building stone that came from these very chambers where we now stand in our imagination. The method of quarrying used here has left distinctive marks that tell us how the ancient stonecutters worked. They would cut narrow channels around a block of the desired size, gradually deepening these trenches until they could insert wooden wedges beneath the block. These wedges would be soaked with water, causing the wood to expand and eventually detach the block from the bedrock. You can still see the smooth surfaces where blocks were removed, like missing teeth in an otherwise intact row. Some partially cut blocks remain, abandoned in the midst of work for reasons we can only guess at. Perhaps a flaw was discovered in the stone, or perhaps work was interrupted by some historical upheaval. One of the most remarkable aspects of these quarries is their location directly beneath the city itself. The ancient stonecutters began their work at an opening on the northern edge of Jerusalem and worked their way southward, following the seam of high-quality limestone. This approach meant that the massive building stones didn't need to be transported great distances. They could be moved directly to construction sites above. Consider for a moment the practical wisdom of this arrangement. Some of the largest stones used in the Temple Mount's retaining walls weigh hundreds of tons. Moving such massive blocks any significant distance would have presented enormous challenges, but quarrying them directly below their destination made the seemingly impossible merely difficult. The silence of these caves now is profound, but in their heyday they would have been filled with the sounds of human industry, the rhythmic striking of metal against stone, the calls of workers coordinating their efforts, perhaps even songs to maintain the pace of labor. Hundreds of workers would have labored here, their oil lamps or torches creating pools of light in the darkness. The dust of pulverized limestone would have hung in the air, coating surfaces and lungs alike. It was dangerous, difficult work, yet it created the raw materials for one of the ancient world's most splendid cities. There's something deeply poetic about Jerusalem's most iconic buildings being born in darkness. The temple, with its gleaming facades and sacred precincts open to the sky, began as stone sleeping in these lightless chambers. The massive blocks that form the western wall, where worshippers have pressed their prayers for centuries, were once part of this continuous bedrock. In a sense, Jerusalem turned itself inside out as it was built, its hidden depths becoming its most visible and venerated surfaces. The quarries also preserve evidence of how the ancient stonecutters organized their work. Niches cut into the walls once held oil lamps to illuminate the space. Channels guided water away from working areas. Different chambers show different techniques and patterns of extraction, perhaps indicating different teams or periods of quarrying activity. Some sections show carefully planned, systematic removal of stone in neat rows, while others appear more opportunistic, following the natural properties of the stone where the highest quality material could be found. Over the centuries, these quarries were largely forgotten. After the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE and the later Roman rebuilding of Jerusalem as Aelia Capitolina, the entrances to the quarries were sealed or obscured. The memory of their existence persisted in some accounts, but their exact location was lost to common knowledge. It wasn't until 1854 that they were rediscovered, supposedly when an American missionary's dog disappeared through a small opening near the Damascus Gate. Upon investigation, these vast chambers were found largely as they had been left centuries before, preserved in the constant temperature and humidity of the underground environment. Since their rediscovery, the caves have acquired new layers of meaning and use. In the late 19th century, Freemasons began holding ceremonies here, drawn by the traditional association between their organization and the stonemasons who built Solomon's Temple. During the British Mandate period, the quarries were developed as a tourist site. Today, they continue to attract visitors seeking connection with Jerusalem's ancient building traditions. The cool, quiet spaces offer respite from the heat and noise of the city above, a place where time seems to slow and the distance between present and past diminishes. What makes these quarry caves particularly fascinating is how they represent the negative space of Jerusalem, the absence that allowed the presence of the city to emerge. For every stone that stands in Jerusalem's walls, buildings, and sacred places, there is a corresponding void here in these underground chambers. The city above is, in a very literal sense, the shadow or impression of these caves, matter removed from one place and reconfigured in another. This relationship between presence and absence, between the hidden and the revealed, is a fitting metaphor for Jerusalem itself, a city where the visible always seems to hint at invisible realities. As our journey through Jerusalem's underground world continues, we carry with us this image of the city's stones being born in darkness before rising into light. These quarry caves remind us that what appears most solid and permanent, the very stones of the city, was once fluid and changeable in the hands of skilled workers. Like all great human creations, Jerusalem emerged from a dialogue between vision and material, between what was imagined and what was possible. In the silent darkness of these ancient quarries, that dialogue continues to echo across the centuries. From the vast, echoing chambers of the ancient quarries, our journey now takes us through narrower passages into another layer of Jerusalem's underground history, the hidden tunnels of the Hasmonean period. These more purposefully designed passageways speak to us of a different era in Jerusalem's long story, a time when the city experienced a brief period of Jewish independence under the Hasmonean dynasty. Following the successful Maccabean revolt against Seleucid rule in 167 to 160 BCE, the Hasmoneans established themselves as both the high priests and rulers of Judea, ushering in a century of autonomous Jewish governance, before Roman domination would change Jerusalem's fate once more. The Hasmonean tunnels represent a different kind of underground architecture, not the industrial spaces of quarries nor the utilitarian water systems, but passageways designed to connect centers of power and provide secure movement through the city. These hidden corridors linked palaces to the Temple Mount, creating a private infrastructure for the ruling elite. Unlike the rough-hewn quarries, many of these tunnels show careful finishing, with smooth walls and occasionally decorated surfaces. They speak of a time when Jerusalem's leadership sought to move through the city unseen, whether for security, convenience, or to maintain an aura of mystery and separation. If we could walk these ancient passages today, we might feel the smooth limestone beneath our fingertips, cool and slightly damp in the underground air. The ceilings would sometimes rise high enough to stand comfortably, while at other points we might need to duck our heads beneath lower archways. The width typically allowed for two people to walk side by side, perhaps a ruler and a trusted advisor deep in conversation, or a high priest and an attendant carrying sacred vessels. The floors, worn smooth by countless footsteps, might still bear the slight depressions of this ancient traffic, like shallow riverbeds, carved by the persistent flow of human movement. The Hasmonean palace complex itself was an impressive structure, portions of which have been discovered by archaeologists working in Jerusalem's Jewish quarter. Built on the western hill of the city, this palace would have commanded impressive views of the Temple Mount and the Kidron Valley. The tunnels connected this seat of political power with the temple, the center of religious authority, a physical manifestation of how the Hasmoneans united these two spheres under their control. For a dynasty that claimed both the high priesthood and the throne, such connections were both practically and symbolically significant. Imagine a Hasmonean ruler moving through these passages on the eve of a major festival. Above, the streets of Jerusalem would be crowded with pilgrims from throughout Judea and the diaspora, the air filled with the sounds of conversation, commerce, and occasional singing as people prepared for the holy days. Market stalls would overflow with offerings for purchase: doves, lambs, oil, and wine. But below, in these quiet tunnels, the ruler could move in silence and solitude, emerging directly onto the Temple Mount without navigating the crowds. This separation speaks to the unique position of the Hasmonean leaders, at once public figures responsible to their people and set apart by their dual authority. The construction of these tunnels represents considerable engineering skill. The builders needed to navigate around existing structures, maintain appropriate slopes for drainage, ensure structural stability, and create a system that could be secured against unauthorized access. Some sections were cut directly through bedrock, while others were constructed as vaulted passages of dressed stone. Niches along the walls would have held oil lamps, their gentle light creating pools of illumination in the darkness, their smoke leaving traces of soot that archaeologists can sometimes still detect today. The Hasmonean period represents a fascinating moment in Jerusalem's history, a time when Hellenistic influence and traditional Jewish practice existed in complex relationship. The Maccabean revolt had begun as a rejection of forced Hellenization under Antiochus IV Epiphanes, yet the Hasmonean rulers themselves adopted many Greek practices and styles in their governance and building projects. These tunnels, with their practical function but sometimes decorative elements, embody this cultural synthesis. Some sections show purely functional design, while others incorporate architectural details influenced by Hellenistic aesthetics, a physical manifestation of Jerusalem's position at the crossroads of cultures. Water management continued to be crucial during this period, and some of the Hasmonean tunnels incorporated channels to collect and direct rainwater to cisterns. Others included drainage systems to keep the passages dry during Jerusalem's winter rainy season. The builders understood that an underground network requires careful attention to water flow, both to preserve the structural integrity of the tunnels and to make them practically usable year-round. Small channels cut into the floors of some passages guided water away from walking surfaces, while others directed it toward storage cisterns for later use. The political reality of the Hasmonean period was one of constant threat, both from external powers and internal divisions. The tunnels served a security function, providing escape routes in case of attack or uprising, hidden entrances and exits, some of which may still remain undiscovered, allowed for emergency movement of people and valuables. Some passages were likely known only to a select few, their existence a closely guarded secret passed from one generation of leadership to the next. In times of peace, they provided privacy. In times of danger, they offered survival. Archaeological exploration of these tunnel systems continues today, though much of Jerusalem's underground world remains inaccessible or undiscovered. The layers of subsequent building, Roman, Byzantine, Islamic, Crusader, Ottoman, and modern, create both obstacles and opportunities for understanding these ancient passages. Each new excavation has the potential to reveal another section of this hidden network, another piece of the puzzle that is Jerusalem's subterranean history. Sometimes a modern construction project will accidentally intersect with these ancient tunnels, creating brief windows into the past before being sealed again. The relationship between these underground passages and the life of the city above them offers a compelling metaphor for how history itself operates, with visible public narratives supported by hidden networks of power, connection, and meaning. What appears on the surface as a simple progression of events often has complex, unseen causes flowing beneath, like these hidden passages beneath Jerusalem's streets. The Hasmonean tunnels remind us that power often moves most effectively when it moves invisibly, that what is publicly proclaimed may be decided in private passageways away from public view. For the Hasmoneans themselves, these tunnels represented their tenuous position, rulers who had won independence from the Seleucids, but who existed in the shadow of rising Roman power to the west. Their dynasty would ultimately fall to Roman intervention, with Pompey the Great conquering Jerusalem in 63 BCE, and eventually installing Herod as king, ending the period of Hasmonean rule. The tunnels, like the dynasty that built them, would be incorporated into new systems, adapted for new purposes, their original functions gradually forgotten, as history flowed onward like water, finding new channels through ancient stone. As we continue our underground journey through Jerusalem's past, these Hasmonean passages serve as a transition from the raw industrial spaces of the quarries to the more refined architectural spaces we will encounter next. They speak to us of a brief but significant moment when Jerusalem was both politically independent and culturally complex, when its underground spaces served not just practical functions, but political ones as well. The whispers of hushed conversations, of priestly processions, of hurried escapes during times of danger. All these echo softly in these ancient corridors, connecting us to those who once moved through darkness beneath the city of light. As we leave behind the hidden corridors of Hasmonean power, our journey through Jerusalem's underground world brings us to one of its most remarkable treasures, a Roman-era street buried 40 feet beneath the modern city. This is no narrow passage or utilitarian tunnel, but a grand thoroughfare that once formed the main artery of Roman Jerusalem, known then as Aelia Capitolina, stretching from what is now the Damascus Gate in the north toward the Temple Mount in the south. This street, the Cardo Maximus, was the bustling heart of the city during the time when Rome's power stretched across the known world. Today, this ancient street slumbers in the cool darkness beneath layers of subsequent civilizations, preserved like a moment frozen in time. When archaeologists first uncovered this buried roadway, they found themselves walking on the same stone pavers where Roman soldiers, Jewish residents, merchants, pilgrims, and countless others had once gone about their daily lives. Each of these massive limestone slabs bears the subtle indentations of countless footsteps and the parallel grooves worn by cartwheels that transported goods throughout the ancient city. If we listen carefully with our imagination, we might almost hear the echoes of sandaled feet, the calls of merchants, the creaking of wooden wheels against stone. The construction of this street speaks to Roman engineering prowess and their vision of urban planning. The pavers are massive blocks of limestone cut with precision and laid in a slight crown, higher in the center than the sides, to allow rainwater to run off into drainage channels that line the thoroughfare. Beneath the street runs a sophisticated sewage system with channels large enough for workers to access for maintenance. This attention to infrastructure was characteristic of Roman cities throughout their empire, the visible grandeur above supported by practical, hidden systems below. The Romans understood that a great city required both beauty to inspire and engineering to function. Along the sides of this buried street, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of columns that once supported a covered portico. These covered walkways would have provided shade from Jerusalem's intense summer sun and shelter from winter rains, creating comfortable spaces for the shops and stalls that lined the road. Imagine walking this street in its heyday, the central roadway busy with carts and foot traffic, while the covered colonnades on either side housed a vibrant marketplace. The sense of spices, cooking food, leather, fabrics, and the inevitable urban odours would have filled the air. Conversations in Latin, Greek, Aramaic, and other languages of the empire's far-flung provinces would have created a constant hum of human activity. The street was constructed after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, when the Romans crushed the Great Jewish Revolt and demolished much of the city, including the Second Temple. When Emperor Hadrian rebuilt Jerusalem as Aelia Capitolina in 135 CE, following the suppression of the Bar Kokhba revolt, he envisioned a thoroughly Roman city built on the ruins of Jewish Jerusalem. This street represents that imperial vision, a standard element of Roman urban planning imposed upon the unique topography of Jerusalem. The very straightness of the road, cut in across the natural contours of the land, speaks to Rome's determination to reshape environments according to their own ideals of order and rationality. What makes this buried street particularly fascinating is how it preserves evidence of daily life in Roman Jerusalem. In some sections, archaeologists have found the stone thresholds of shops that once lined the thoroughfare. Some still bear the sockets where doors were hung and the wear marks where those doors swung open and closed countless times over the years. Stone benches where shopkeepers might have displayed their wares or where weary travellers could rest remain in place. Even the occasional game board carved into stone by bored shopkeepers or guards to pass the time between customers has been preserved, a touchingly human connection across the centuries. The shops themselves tell us about the commerce of Roman Jerusalem. Some contain stone weights and measures, indicating businesses dealing in grain, oil, or wine. Others preserved evidence of metalworking, textile production, or food preparation. One excavated shop appears to have belonged to a glass blower, with fragments of raw glass and production waste still scattered across its floor. These establishments weren't just places of business, but often included living quarters for the shopkeeper and their family in rooms behind or above the street-level shop. The street was thus not merely a transportation artery, but the set-in for countless human lives and stories. The fate of this grand street, to be gradually buried beneath later constructions, speaks to Jerusalem's unique pattern of building upon its own past. Rather than completely demolishing older structures, successive generations often built directly on top of them, using the earlier buildings as foundations or filling them in to create level building platforms. This pattern was partly due to the city's challenging topography, with its hills and valleys requiring significant engineering to create usable space, and partly due to the practical value of reusing existing materials. The result is a city that grew upward as much as outward, with each era resting upon the physical remains of those that came before. The process by which this Roman street came to be buried 40 feet deep is a fascinating study in urban evolution. After the Roman period came the Byzantine era, when Jerusalem became an important Christian center. New buildings, including churches and monasteries, were constructed, often reusing the Roman street grid, but gradually raising the ground level. The Persian invasion of 614 CE and the Muslim conquest in 638 CE brought new changes, with some areas abandoned and others rebuilt according to different needs and traditions. By the time of the Crusader period, 1039 to 1187 CE, much of the Roman street level was already buried beneath debris, fill, and new constructions. Walking this buried street today is to experience a curious inversion of time. The modern city buzzes with activity 40 feet above, while down here, the past waits in silence. The temperature is notably cooler than on the surface. The air carries the distinctive mineral scent of ancient stone, and the acoustics create a sense of both intimacy and vastness. Voices echo softly against stone surfaces that have witnessed the passage of empires. The juxtaposition of this perfectly preserved ancient thoroughfare beneath the living city above offers a powerful metaphor for how history itself works. The present moment always supported by hidden layers of the past. The excavation and preservation of this Roman street has been a monumental archaeological achievement, requiring careful work to ensure that neither the ancient remains nor the modern city above are compromised. Some sections have been opened to the public, allowing visitors to descend through time and walk where Roman citizens once walked. Other sections remain buried, preserved in darkness for future generations to study with perhaps more advanced techniques than we possess today. This balance between access and preservation represents one of the great challenges of archaeology in a continuously inhabited city like Jerusalem. As pilgrims and tourists walk this ancient thoroughfare today, they participate in a kind of time travel, their feet adding imperceptibly to the wear patterns begun by Roman sandals 2,000 years ago. The experience connects them physically to those who came before, creating a tangible link across millennia. This is the particular magic of Jerusalem's underground world. The way it allows direct physical contact with the past in a manner that texts and artifacts displayed in museums cannot quite achieve. To walk this street is to briefly inhabit the same space as countless others across time, to momentarily share in their experience of this sacred and contested city. As we continue our journey through Jerusalem's subterranean realms, this Roman street serves as a reminder of how civilizations literally build upon one another, how the grandest public spaces can be forgotten and buried, and how the past is never truly gone, but merely hidden beneath the surfaces of our present world. The silent stones of this ancient thoroughfare, with their worn surfaces and patient endurance, connect us to the rhythms of daily life in a Jerusalem long transformed but never entirely lost. From the grand public thoroughfare of Roman Jerusalem, our underground journey now takes us into more utilitarian but equally fascinating spaces. The vast Byzantine cisterns that once stored water for thousands of residents. As we transition from the straight lines and ordered planning of Roman urban design to these massive subterranean reservoirs, we enter a world where the necessities of survival shape the city's hidden infrastructure. The Byzantine period, roughly spanning the 4th to 7th centuries CE, saw Jerusalem transformed into a major Christian center, with elaborate churches, monasteries, and pilgrim accommodations requiring substantial water resources. The Byzantine cisterns of Jerusalem represent a remarkable feat of engineering, adapted to the particular challenges of the city's environment. Jerusalem receives rainfall only during the winter months, with long dry summers requiring careful water management. The Byzantines, building upon Roman hydraulic knowledge, but adapting it to local needs and their own technological traditions, created an extensive network of underground water storage chambers throughout the city. These weren't simple tanks, but carefully designed spaces that maintained water quality over months of storage while maximizing capacity within the limited urban space. Step with me now into one of these ancient cisterns, descending worn stone stairs into a cool, echoing chamber where the air is noticeably more humid than in the dry Jerusalem above. The ceiling arches overhead, supported by rows of columns or pillars that create a forest of stone, rising from the cistern floor. These supports weren't merely structural, but allowed for a greater water capacity than a flat ceiling would permit. The gentle sound of dripping water might accompany us, each drop adding its small music to the acoustic qualities of these vast spaces. When filled, these cisterns could hold hundreds of thousands of gallons of water, a liquid treasure more valuable than gold in Jerusalem's dry seasons. The walls and floors of these cisterns bear a distinctive waterproof lining, made from layers of pottery fragments, mixed with a special hydraulic mortar called hydraulicon. This pinkish material, containing crushed brick or pottery that gave it special water-resistant properties, prevented precious water from seeping into the porous limestone that forms Jerusalem's bedrock. The surfaces were often burnished to a smooth finish, both for cleanliness and to minimize places where sediment could collect. Some cisterns show multiple layers of this coating, evidence of regular maintenance over centuries of use. Most impressive is how these cisterns were integrated into the larger water management system of Byzantine Jerusalem. Rainwater was collected from the roofs of buildings through channels and pipes that directed it into settling basins, where sediment could drop out before the clearer water was channeled into the main storage cisterns. Some larger complexes, like churches and monasteries, had their own dedicated cisterns, while others served neighborhoods or public areas. The placement of these reservoirs often determined the location of other urban features. Public fountains, bathhouses, and gardens all needed to be situated where water could be easily supplied from these underground sources. Imagine the practical routines that these cisterns supported. Each morning, residents would come to draw water for the day's needs: cooking, washing, drinking, cleaning. Women might gather at public fountains fed by the cisterns, sharing news and conversation as they filled their clay jars or leather containers. Monasteries would have assigned brothers to oversee water distribution, ensuring this precious resource was used wisely. During festivals and pilgrim seasons, when Jerusalem's population swelled with visitors, the city's ability to provide adequate water for all depended entirely on how well these cisterns had been maintained and filled during the rainy season. The social significance of these water storage systems extended beyond mere practicality. Access to water has always shaped power relationships within communities, and the Byzantine period was no exception. Control over major cisterns conferred influence and responsibility. Religious institutions often maintained the largest water storage facilities, reinforcing their central role in community life. The practical necessity of water created nodes of daily gathering and interaction, shaping the social geography of the city in ways that might not be immediately obvious to modern observers. Many of these Byzantine cisterns were constructed within spaces that had served different functions in earlier periods. Roman buildings, damaged during conflicts or simply abandoned as needs changed, were sometimes converted into water storage chambers, their walls lined with waterproof mortar, their doorways sealed except for access points, their interior spaces subdivided by new construction. This adaptive reuse of existing underground spaces was a practical solution to the challenges of building in an already densely occupied urban environment. It also represents the palimpsest nature of Jerusalem's development, where each era writes its needs and values over the physical remains of previous generations. The engineering knowledge required to build these cisterns combined traditions from across the Byzantine world. The empire's eastern provinces had long histories of sophisticated water management, from the ancient systems of Mesopotamia to the remarkable achievements of Roman engineers. Byzantine builders in Jerusalem drew on these traditions while adapting them to local conditions. The specific qualities of Jerusalem stone, the patterns of rainfall, the topography of the city with its hills and valleys. The result was an underground water infrastructure uniquely suited to Jerusalem's needs. The scale of some of these cisterns still astonishes visitors today. The largest could hold millions of liters of water and required sophisticated understanding of structural principles to construct safely. The weight of water exerts enormous pressure on containing walls, and the Byzantine engineers needed to calculate appropriate thickness and reinforcement to prevent collapse. The regular arrangement of columns or pillars distributed the weight of the ceiling and any structures above it, while buttressing walls countered the lateral pressure of the stored water. These weren't merely holes dug in the ground, but carefully designed architectural spaces serving a vital function. The aesthetics of these utilitarian spaces might surprise modern visitors. Though built for practical purposes, many cisterns show attention to proportion, symmetry, and even decorative elements. Capitals of supporting columns might bear simple carved motifs, arches might follow elegant mathematical ratios, and the overall effect can be unexpectedly cathedral-like. These qualities remind us that for Byzantine builders, the distinction between practical and beautiful construction was less rigid than in modern thinking. Functionality did not preclude harmony of design, and spaces that served basic needs could still elevate the spirit through their proportions and execution. When the Persian forces captured Jerusalem in 615 CE, followed by the Muslim conquest in 638 CE, many of these cisterns continued in use, maintained and sometimes modified by the city's new rulers. Water infrastructure, unlike religious buildings, could transition between cultural contexts with relatively little adaptation. The practical knowledge of how to maintain these systems was preserved across political and religious changes, passed down through generations of those responsible for the city's water supply. Some cisterns have remained in continuous use from the Byzantine period to modern times, perhaps the longest-serving human-made structures in the city. The silence of these cisterns today, many of them empty or repurposed for other uses, belies their once central role in sustaining life in Jerusalem. When full, they would have resonated with the particular acoustics that water creates in enclosed stone spaces, sounds that would have been familiar to Byzantine residents, but are rarely experienced in modern visits to these sites. The cool air, the play of light reflected from water surfaces onto stone ceilings, the echoing quality of voices. All these sensory aspects were part of how people experience these underground spaces in daily life. As we continue our journey through Jerusalem's subterranean world, these Byzantine cisterns represent a transition point between the grand public architecture of Roman Jerusalem and the more intimate, specialized spaces we will explore next. They remind us that beneath the spiritual and political narratives that often dominate discussions of Jerusalem's history lies a more fundamental story of how people solved the practical challenges of urban life in a challenging environment. The silent, empty chambers that once held the city's most precious resource connect us to the daily concerns and ingenious solutions of those who made Jerusalem their home during the Byzantine flowering of the Holy City. From the practical water storage systems of Byzantine Jerusalem, our journey through the city's underground world now brings us to spaces created during one of history's most dramatic periods, the Crusader era. Beneath the bustling medieval markets that still characterize parts of Jerusalem's old city lie the buried halls and chambers of the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, established after the First Crusade captured the city in 1099 CE. These underground spaces tell a complex story of European Christians who ventured far from their homes to control a city they considered rightfully theirs by religious claim, despite having no historical connection to the region. The Crusader halls we explore now were once at ground level, grand spaces where knights, clergy, and administrators of the new Latin kingdom conducted their affairs. Time and the continuous rebuilding of Jerusalem have buried these once prominent structures, transforming what were proud architectural statements into subterranean chambers accessible only by descending from the current street level. This physical transformation mirrors the historical fate of the Crusader kingdom itself, a brief moment of European control eventually subsumed into the longer continuity of Middle Eastern history. Imagine stepping into one of these buried Crusader halls today. The first sensation might be the sudden transition from the warm Jerusalem sun to cool, still air. Your eyes would adjust to the softer light filtering from modern fixtures or narrow openings. Above you would arch the distinctive vaulted ceilings characteristic of Crusader architecture, with their sturdy ribbed construction supporting the weight of centuries of later building. These aren't the soaring Gothic arches that were beginning to appear in Europe during the same period, but rather a more robust Romanesque style adapted to the materials and conditions of the Levant. The limestone blocks forming these vaults and walls bear distinctive diagonal tooling marks, the signature of Crusader stonemasons, whose techniques differed from both earlier Byzantine builders and later Islamic craftsmen. These marks, visible by running your fingers across the stone surface, create a subtle texture that catches light in a particular way, adding visual depth to the simple forms. Some blocks might bear mason's marks, simple symbols carved to identify which craftsman had prepared them or to indicate their intended position in the structure. These small details connect us directly to the hands that shaped these spaces nearly 1,000 years ago. The Crusaders, who established their kingdom in Jerusalem, brought with them architectural traditions from various European regions, particularly France, Italy, and Germany. Yet what they built in Jerusalem represents a unique hybrid style, influenced by both what they brought and what they found. Local building techniques, the available materials, and even the aesthetic traditions of the region all shaped their construction. The result was a distinctive Crusader style that differed from contemporary European architecture while remaining recognizably Western in its underlying concepts. Many of these underground Crusader spaces were associated with the powerful military orders that emerged during this period: the Knights Templar, the Hospitaller Order, and others. These organizations combined religious devotion with military purpose, creating a new kind of institution specific to the Crusader context. Their headquarters, dormitories, stables, storage facilities, and chapter houses formed significant complexes within Crusader Jerusalem. The massive halls we find underground today, with their thick walls and substantial construction, reflect both the wealth and the ambition of these orders. The Knights Templar, in particular, established their headquarters on the Temple Mount, which they believed to be the site of Solomon's Temple. The Al-Aqsa Mosque was repurposed as their main hall, while they used the Dome of the Rock, renamed the Templum Domini, Temple of the Lord, as a church. Below these structures, they developed and utilized underground spaces, some of which had existed since earlier periods. These subterranean areas served both practical and symbolic functions, connecting the knights to what they believed was the original temple, while providing secure storage and meeting places. The Hospitaller Order, dedicated initially to caring for sick pilgrims before evolving into a military force, established a massive compound in what is now the Christian Quarter. Parts of this complex remain underground today, including large halls that once served as hospitals, dormitories, and administrative centers. The scale of these spaces indicates the substantial resources controlled by the Order and the importance of Jerusalem as the center of their operations. Their architecture combined functionality with symbolic elements that reinforced their religious mission. Walking through these buried Crusader halls, we might notice how they differ from the cisterns and tunnels we've explored earlier. These were designed as primary spaces for human activity, not as infrastructure or support systems. The proportions are suited to gatherings of people, with dimensions that create comfortable acoustics for conversation or ceremonial proceedings. Doorways, windows, now often below street level, and architectural details were all designed with human experience as the primary consideration. These weren't hidden spaces originally, but prominent buildings that made visible the Crusader presence in Jerusalem. The materials used in Crusader construction tell their own story of cultural exchange and adaptation. While the basic building material remained the local limestone that has characterized Jerusalem construction throughout its history, the Crusaders introduced new techniques for cutting, finishing, and assembling these stones. They also incorporated materials scavenged from earlier structures. Roman columns, Byzantine capitals, and decorative elements from various periods appear repurposed in Crusader buildings. This practice was partly pragmatic, using readily available materials, but also served to symbolically appropriate the city's past into their present. The fate of these once grand halls changed dramatically in 1187 CE, when Saladin recaptured Jerusalem for Muslim rule, ending the first period of Crusader control. Many Crusader buildings were repurposed rather than destroyed, their solid construction making them valuable resources for the city's new rulers. Some became foundations for new structures, others were converted to different uses, and gradually, as Jerusalem continued to evolve, many ended up buried beneath new construction. The street level rose through accumulated debris, intentional fill-in, and new building, leaving these Crusader spaces increasingly subterranean. During later periods, particularly under Mamluk and Ottoman rule, markets developed above these buried Crusader structures. The stone vaults provided solid foundations for new commercial spaces, while some of the underground halls were repurposed as storage areas for the shops above. This layering created the vertical relationship we see today, medieval markets bustling at street level, while Crusader Jerusalem slumbers beneath them. In some cases, openings were maintained to access these lower levels for storage or other purposes, preserving knowledge of their existence even as their original functions were forgotten. The acoustics of these underground halls create a distinctive environment that affects how we experience them today. Stone vaults tend to amplify and reflect sound in particular ways, creating resonances that would have been familiar to the Crusaders who used these spaces. Voices carry differently than in open air, creating a sense of enclosure and separation from the world above. This acoustic quality might have reinforced the Crusaders' sense of creating a European enclave within a foreign city, a familiar sounding space amid the unfamiliar sounds of the Middle Eastern city above. Archaeological work continues to reveal more about these Crusader spaces and how they functioned within the larger urban context of medieval Jerusalem. Recent excavations have uncovered evidence of how these buildings connected to street networks, water systems, and defensive structures. The picture that emerges is of a systematic approach to urban planning, with the Crusader authorities reorganizing Jerusalem according to their needs and concepts, while working within the constraints of the existing city. Their Jerusalem was divided into quarters, a pattern that continues to define the old city today. The buried Crusader halls of Jerusalem serve as a powerful physical metaphor for the historical relationship between the Crusader period and the longer continuity of the city's history. What was once dominant has been literally subsumed by subsequent developments, preserved but no longer defining the city's character. Yet these spaces remain influential, their solid construction continuing to shape what happens above them, just as the Crusader period, though relatively brief, left lasting impacts on Jerusalem's religious, political, and cultural landscape. As our journey continues deeper into Jerusalem's underground world, these Crusader halls represent a moment when European and Middle Eastern architectural traditions met and mingled, creating spaces that belonged fully to neither world but constituted something new. Their current subterranean state, lying silent beneath the continuous commercial life of the medieval markets, reminds us of how history layers itself physically in this most complex of cities, each era building upon, adapting, and sometimes burying what came before. As we leave the sturdy vaulted halls of the Crusader period, our underground journey through Jerusalem's history brings us to more intimate passages created during the long Ottoman rule of the city. From 1517 until the end of World War I in 1918, Jerusalem was part of the vast Ottoman Empire, and during this period, a network of narrow passages developed beneath parts of the old city, particularly in the areas associated with the spice trade. These weren't grand architectural statements like the Crusader halls, nor essential infrastructure like the Byzantine cisterns, but practical spaces that developed organically to serve the needs of merchants and their valuable commodities. The Ottoman-era passages we explore now have a distinctly different character from earlier underground spaces. Their scale is more human and intimate. Narrow corridors, often just wide enough for a person to walk comfortably, occasionally opening into small chambers or storage rooms. The ceilings are typically lower, sometimes formed by simple stone arches, other times by wooden beams supporting the floors above. These weren't designed as showpieces, but as functional extensions of the commercial life that thrived in Ottoman Jerusalem. Their very modesty tells us something important about how ordinary people adapted urban spaces to meet daily needs. Imagine entering one of these passages through a low doorway tucked beneath a shop in the modern souk market. The transition from the bright, noisy marketplace to these quiet, cool passages is immediate and striking. The air here carries different scents, the mineral smell of old stone, perhaps a lingering hint of the spices once stored in these spaces, the slight mustiness that accompanies places rarely exposed to sunlight. Your footsteps echo softly against stone floors worn smooth by centuries of use. Light might filter down from small openings or be provided by modern fixtures that cast warm pools of illumination in what would once have been spaces lit only by oil lamps or candles. The spice trade was particularly important in Ottoman Jerusalem, connecting the city to far-flung parts of the empire and beyond. Merchants dealing in cinnamon from Ceylon, pepper from India, cloves from the Spice Islands, saffron from Persia, and locally harvested herbs from the Judean hills needed secure, climate-controlled spaces to store their valuable goods. These underground passages and chambers provided ideal conditions: cool with relatively stable humidity, protected from the heat of Jerusalem's summer sun that could degrade the essential oils that gave spices their value. The stone walls also offered protection from fire, a constant concern in the densely built markets of the old city. The layout of these passages often reflects the incremental way they developed. Unlike the carefully planned Roman streets or Byzantine cisterns we've explored, these spaces grew organically as merchants expanded their storage capacity by excavating beneath existing buildings or connecting previously separate cellars. The result is a somewhat maze-like quality, with passages turning unexpectedly, changing levels with a few steps up or down, occasionally leading to dead ends or small rooms that served specific functions. This organic development creates a sense of discovery as you move through these spaces, never quite sure what might lie around the next corner. The construction techniques visible in these Ottoman passages combine traditional local methods with influences from across the empire. The distinctive pointed arches of Islamic architecture appear alongside simpler barrel vaults. Some walls show carefully dressed stone, while others use rougher rubble construction covered with plaster. Wooden elements, beams, door frames, storage shelves, introduced organic material into these stone environments, though much of the original wood has been replaced over centuries of maintenance and adaptation. These varied techniques speak to the diverse craftsmen working in Ottoman Jerusalem and the practical, non-monumental nature of these spaces. Storage of goods wasn't the only function of these underground passages. They also facilitated movement between different parts of the market, allowing merchants and porters to transport goods without navigating the crowded, narrow streets above. Some passages connected directly to caravanserais, the inn-like structures where traveling merchants would stay and store their goods during their time in Jerusalem. Others linked to small manufacturing spaces where spices would be ground, blended, or processed before sale. This interconnected system created an efficient commercial infrastructure beneath the visible market. The social world of the Ottoman spice merchants was complex and sophisticated. Guild organizations regulated trade, maintained standards, and provided social support for their members. Different ethnic and religious communities often specialized in particular aspects of the spice trade. Arab Muslims might control imports from Egypt and Arabia, while Armenian Christians might manage connections to the eastern provinces, and Jewish merchants might handle specific local distributions. The underground passages we're exploring would have been places where these different communities interacted, negotiated, and conducted the business that kept Jerusalem connected to trade networks stretching from Europe to the Far East. Many of these passages include small niches or chambers that served as offices, where transactions were recorded, samples examined, and deals struck away from the noise and public nature of the markets above. Some retained stone benches where merchants might have sat to conduct business, or small desk-like platforms where scales for weighing valuable spices once stood. Coffee might have been served during these meetings, another valuable trade good that became increasingly important during the Ottoman period. These humble spaces witnessed the commercial negotiations that connected Jerusalem to the global economy of their time. The security of valuable trade goods was a constant concern, and many of these passages include features designed to protect merchandise from theft. Heavy doors with substantial locking mechanisms could secure sections of the underground network. Some chambers could only be accessed through shops above, ensuring that entry was controlled by the shop owner. Storage rooms often had high shelves or niches where particularly valuable items could be placed out of easy reach. These security measures protected not just the spices themselves, but also the records of transactions, debts, and obligations that formed the invisible structure of Ottoman commerce. Climate control was a natural benefit of these underground spaces, but Ottoman merchants enhanced these properties with thoughtful adaptations. Small ventilation shafts allowed for minimal air circulation without exposing goods to excessive moisture or heat. Some chambers show evidence of charcoal braziers that would have been lit during particularly damp periods to reduce humidity that could damage spices. Clay jars, wooden barrels, and metal containers provided further protection for different types of goods, each storage method suited to the particular requirements of specific spices and herbs. The continuity of use in these spaces spans centuries, with some still serving storage functions for modern shops in Jerusalem's markets. This unbroken link to the past is characteristic of Jerusalem, where the practical value of existing structures often ensures their preservation through adaptation rather than replacement. Some shops in the modern SUQ are owned by families who have been in the same location for many generations, their current business practices still influenced by patterns established during the Ottoman period. The underground passages that serve these businesses connect modern merchants not just to additional storage space, but to their own commercial heritage. Light and visibility would have been precious commodities in these underground spaces during Ottoman times. Oil lamps placed in niches carved into the walls would have provided limited illumination, their small flames creating pools of light amid the shadows. Moving through these passages would have required intimate familiarity with their layout or guidance from someone who knew the way. This limited visibility created a natural security system. Only those with legitimate business would know how to navigate the underground network efficiently. Today, electric lighting reveals details that would have remained in shadow for most of their history. The sounds of the marketplace above would have filtered down into these passages in muted form. The calls of vendors, the haggling of customers, the singing of religious processions passing through the streets, all transformed into a distant backdrop to the more immediate sounds of commerce conducted in the cool darkness below. This acoustic quality might have contributed to the efficiency of business transactions, creating spaces where conversations could be heard clearly without the distractions of the busy public areas above. Even now, standing in these passages, one experiences a similar acoustic transition, the clamour of the modern market becoming distant and indistinct. As we continue our journey through Jerusalem's underground world, these Ottoman-era passages offer a different perspective on the city's history, not the grand narrative of kings, conquerors, and religious leaders, but the daily reality of commerce and practical adaptation. They remind us that beneath the spiritual significance and political struggles that often dominate discussions of Jerusalem lies the continuous flow of ordinary life, with its concerns for livelihood, security, and efficient solutions to practical problems. These humble passages, with their organic development and continuing utility, connect us to the lived experience of the countless merchants who made Jerusalem an important commercial centre during 4 centuries of Ottoman rule. From the intimate commercial passages of Ottoman Jerusalem, our underground journey now brings us to one of the most significant and spiritually resonant subsurface spaces in the city, the Western Wall tunnels. These tunnels run along the western retaining wall of the Temple Mount platform, revealing the full extent of what is arguably the most sacred structure in Judaism. While the familiar portion of the Western Wall, often called the Wailing Wall, visible in the open prayer plaza, represents just a fraction of the ancient structure, these tunnels expose nearly 6,800 feet of this massive retaining wall, most of which had been buried beneath centuries of urban development. The experience of entering these tunnels differs markedly from our earlier explorations. Here, the underground spaces weren't designed to be subterranean, but became so as Jerusalem's street level rose over the millennia. Walking through these tunnels, you're actually moving alongside what was once an open-air street running along the western edge of the Temple Mount, a street that gradually disappeared beneath later construction. This process of accretion, where cities literally rise upon their own remains, is particularly visible here, where excavations have revealed the full height of the Herodian retaining wall descending far below the modern street level. The scale of the western wall within these tunnels is immediately striking. Massive limestone blocks, some weighing hundreds of tons, rise in precise courses that testify to the remarkable engineering and construction skills of the Herodian period. One particular stone, known as the Western Stone, measures 43 feet long, 10 feet high, and approximately 10 feet deep, with an estimated weight of 570 tons. Standing beside this colossal block, your hand resting on its smooth surface, you cannot help but wonder at the technical achievement it represents. How it was quarried, transported, raised to position, and set with such precision that it has remained in place for 2 millennia. The story these tunnels tell is one of continuous human presence and activity over more than 20 centuries. Layer upon layer of habitation is visible in the archaeological remains exposed along the route. The foundation courses of the Herodian wall itself date to the time of Herod the Great in the late 1st century BCE, when he undertook the massive expansion of the Temple Mount platform. Above and alongside these ancient Jewish remains, you can see evidence of Roman, Byzantine, early Islamic, Crusader, Mamluk, and Ottoman periods, each adding their own structures, adapting existing spaces, and gradually raising the level of the city around this immovable sacred boundary. The tunnels reveal several fascinating architectural features that would otherwise remain hidden. One of the most remarkable is Wilson's Arch, a massive stone arch that once supported a bridge connecting the Temple Mount to the upper city on the western hill. This structure, named after the 19th century explorer who first documented it, spans 42 feet and is constructed of stones weighing up to 8 tons each. When it was built during the Herodian period, this arch stood in open air above the street level. Today, it forms part of the ceiling of an underground hall, dramatically illustrating how much the surrounding ground level has risen over the centuries. Another significant feature exposed in these tunnels is the massive cistern known as the Struthian Pool, originally built by the Hasmoneans in the 2nd century BCE and later modified during the Roman period. When Herod constructed his Temple Mount expansion, this cistern was already in use, and his builders had to work around it. Later, during Hadrian's rebuilding of Jerusalem as Aelia Capitolina in the 2nd century CE, the pool was roofed over with a massive barrel vault to support a new street above. This layering of structures from different periods, each accommodating what came before while meeting new needs, epitomizes Jerusalem's architectural evolution. The religious significance of these spaces creates a unique atmosphere within the tunnels. For observant Jews, proximity to the Temple Mount, particularly its southwestern corner, believed to be closest to where the Holy of Holies once stood, holds profound spiritual meaning. Throughout the tunnels, you might encounter people praying, touching the ancient stones, or quietly contemplating the historical and religious significance of the site. This continuing spiritual connection to a structure built 2,000 years ago demonstrates the remarkable continuity of Jewish attachment to Jerusalem, despite centuries of exile and restricted access to the city. The construction techniques visible in the Herodian wall sections are particularly fascinating for what they reveal about ancient engineering. The massive stones were laid without mortar, their precise cutting and tremendous weight keeping them stable. The edges of each stone were drafted, cut with a margin around the face, creating the distinctive appearance where the border of each block appears slightly recessed from its center. This technique, requiring exceptional skill from stonemasons, created a subtle play of light and shadow across the wall's surface. Running your hand along these ancient stones, you can feel the slight texture difference between the smooth border and the more roughly finished center. The tunnels also reveal how water management remained a constant concern throughout Jerusalem's history. Several cisterns, channels, and aqueducts from various periods are visible along the route. Some of these water systems incorporated sections of earlier ones, while others represent completely new solutions to the perennial challenge of providing water to a city built on hills with few natural springs. The Hasmonean channel, which brought water into the city from southern springs, passes through this area, as does the later Ayyubid and Mamluk period additions to the city's water infrastructure. These overlapping systems represent an underground conversation across centuries about the most basic human need. Perhaps most striking about the Western Wall tunnels is how they reveal the vertical dimension of Jerusalem's archaeology. In most cities, the layers of history are primarily horizontal, one city built upon the ruins of another. But Jerusalem's unique topography and continuous occupation have created a complex three-dimensional archaeological reality where structures from different periods exist not just above one another, but alongside and even intertwined with each other. A Roman column might be incorporated into a Byzantine wall, which in turn supports a Mamluk arch, all within a few feet of each other. This compression of history into dense, complex arrangements challenges our usual linear understanding of chronology. The tunnels also expose how different cultures and religions have shared this sacred space, sometimes in conflict, but often in pragmatic coexistence. A Mamluk-era school, madrasa, built above Herodian foundations, Crusader halls converted to Ottoman residential space, Roman streets repurposed for Byzantine commercial use. All these adaptations speak to Jerusalem's complex identity as a city holy to three major religions. The archaeological remains reveal that while the narrative of a conflict often dominates discussions of Jerusalem's history, the physical reality has frequently been one of practical accommodation and cultural exchange. The process by which these tunnels were excavated represents a fascinating chapter in archaeological history. Beginning with explorations in the 19th century by scholars like Charles Wilson and Charles Warren, continuing through complex and sometimes politically sensitive excavations in the late 20th century, and ongoing into the present, the work has required balancing archaeological research with religious sensitivities, engineering challenges, and the needs of the living city above. Excavating beneath existing structures without compromising their stability has required innovative techniques and careful planning. For visitors today, moving through these tunnels provides a uniquely immersive historical experience. Unlike museum displays where artifacts are removed from their context, here the entire environment is the artifact. The cool air, the subtle scent of ancient stone, the change in acoustics as you move from narrow passages to larger chambers, the sense of weight above you. All these sensory aspects contribute to a profound connection with Jerusalem's past. You are not merely seeing history, you are physically within it, surrounded by the material reality of centuries of human habitation. The continuous settlement revealed in these tunnels challenges simplistic narratives about Jerusalem's past. The physical evidence shows not neat succession, but complex continuity, with each new group adding to, rather than completely replacing, what came before. Buildings were repurposed rather than demolished. Sacred spaces were reinterpreted rather than obliterated. Construction techniques were adapted and absorbed rather than rejected. This material reality suggests a history more nuanced than the competing claims that often characterize discussions of Jerusalem's past. As we continue our journey through Jerusalem's subterranean world, the Western Wall, tunnels offer perhaps the clearest physical manifestation of how the present city rests upon the accumulated layers of its past. These aren't merely historical remains, but living connections to a continuous human story that stretches back over 2 millennia. The massive stones of the Herodian Wall, still standing in their original positions despite earthquakes, wars, and the passage of time, remind us of the enduring physical presence of history in this most complex and contested of cities. From the massive stones of the Western Wall, tunnels, our underground journey now takes us even deeper into Jerusalem's past, to water systems that predate even King David's conquest of the city in approximately 1000 BCE. We descend now into one of the oldest and most intriguing underground complexes in Jerusalem, the system known as Warren's Shaft, named after the British explorer Charles Warren, who first documented it in 1867. This ancient water system, carved into the eastern slope of the city of David, represents an engineering solution created by the Jebusite, inhabitants of Jerusalem before the Israelite period, and possibly utilized during David's conquest of the city. The transition into this much earlier period is marked by a change in the character of the underground spaces we encounter. Unlike the precisely cut stones of the Herodian walls or the planned architecture of Byzantine cisterns, the Warren's Shaft system has a more organic quality. Its passages following natural fissures in the limestone, widened and adapted by human hands. The rough walls bear the marks of ancient bronze and flint tools, each chisel strike representing hours of labor in the unforgiving stone. The narrow winding passages create a sense of journeying not just downward through physical space but backward through time, to a period when Jerusalem was a small Canaanite hilltop settlement rather than the expansive city it would later become. The basic purpose of this complex system was to provide the inhabitants of the ancient city secure access to the Gihon Spring, Jerusalem's primary water source, which emerged outside the city walls. In periods of siege, this presented an obvious vulnerability. Defenders needed water but couldn't safely exit their fortifications to reach the spring. The Warren's Shaft system offered an ingenious solution, a series of underground passages and vertical shafts that allowed water collectors to descend from within the walled city to the spring level without exposing themselves to enemy forces. This engineering feat represents one of humanity's earliest attempts to use underground architecture to solve strategic military challenges. Standing now in these ancient passages, your hand touching stone worked by people who lived over 3,000 years ago, you might feel a profound connection across time. The cool air carries the distant sound of water. The same Gihon spring still flows today, its gentle gurgle, an unbroken acoustic thread, connecting the present moment to the daily reality of those ancient Jebusites who depended on this water for their survival. The darkness is profound in sections where electric lighting hasn't been installed for modern visitors, giving some sense of how these spaces would have felt when illuminated only by oil lamps or torches, their flickering light casting moving shadows across the rough stone surfaces. The central feature of this system, which gave it its modern name, is a vertical shaft approximately 40 feet deep that connects an upper tunnel system to a lower horizontal passage leading to the spring. For many years, archaeologists believed this shaft was used by ancient water carriers who would descend with jars or skins, collect water, and return to the safety of the city above. However, more recent research suggests the shaft itself may have been a natural karstic feature that was incorporated into the system but not actually used as the primary access point. The true complexity of the system has become clearer through modern archaeological work. Current understanding suggests that the ancient inhabitants created a stepped tunnel that allowed direct access to the spring, with Warren's shaft being perhaps a secondary feature or even simply part of the natural drainage system that they modified. This sophisticated arrangement of tunnels, steps, and chambers demonstrates a remarkable understanding of the local geology and hydrology. The people who created this system worked with the natural features of the limestone hill rather than imposing an entirely artificial structure, showing both practical wisdom and efficient use of limited tools and technology. The historical significance of this water system extends beyond its engineering aspects. Some scholars connect it to the biblical account of David's conquest of Jerusalem, where the text mentions warriors ascending through a water shaft, tzinor in Hebrew, to capture the Jebusite city. While the exact identification remains debated, the Warren's shaft system offers a tantalizing physical context for understanding this ancient narrative. Whether or not this specific shaft was the one referenced in the biblical account, the system certainly existed during that historical period and would have been a strategic element in any siege situation. The dating of various components of this water system spans multiple centuries, with some elements possibly dating back to the Middle Bronze Age, around 1800 BCE, and modifications continuing into the Iron Age. This long period of development and adaptation speaks to the continuous occupation of the site and the enduring importance of water security for Jerusalem's inhabitants. Each generation maintained, improved, and sometimes dramatically redesigned aspects of the system to meet their needs, leaving a complex archaeological record that researchers still work to fully understand. Moving through these ancient passages today requires navigating narrow, sometimes awkwardly proportioned spaces, a reminder that the people who created and used these tunnels were generally smaller in stature than modern humans. The average height of adults during this period would have been several inches shorter than today, making movement through these confined spaces somewhat easier for them than for many modern visitors. This physical reality creates another subtle connection to the past, as your body adapts to spaces designed for those ancient water carriers, experiencing in some small way the physical constraints they navigated daily. The technology used to create these tunnels was remarkably simple by modern standards. Bronze chisels, stone hammers, flint tools, and tremendous human effort. Each cubic foot of limestone removed represented hours of painstaking labor in difficult conditions. Poor lighting, limited ventilation, the constant presence of water, and the risk of collapse. That such an extensive system could be created with these basic tools speaks to the determination and skill of these ancient engineers and laborers. Running your fingers along the chisel marks left on the tunnel walls, you can almost feel the rhythm of their work across the millennia. The system also included elements designed for water management beyond mere access. Dams, channels, and small pools controlled the flow of the Gihon's waters, directing them where needed and allowing for efficient collection. Some of these features were likely added during later periods as the system was modified and expanded. The Siloam Channel, for instance, directed water from the spring to irrigate agricultural terraces in the Kidron Valley, demonstrating that the system served both defensive and productive purposes, protecting the city during conflict while enhancing its agricultural output during peaceful periods. The Warren's shaft system represents just one phase in the long history of Jerusalem's relationship with its water sources. Later periods would see increasingly sophisticated solutions to the same basic challenge: how to secure water for a growing population in an area with limited natural resources. Hezekiah's tunnel, which we explored earlier, represents a dramatic reimagining of this problem during the 8th century BCE, creating a completely new underground route for the Gihon's waters. Yet even that later achievement builds conceptually on the foundation established by the creators of the Warren's shaft system. The idea that underground architecture could transform the city's relationship with its environment. What makes this ancient water system particularly poignant is how it connects to universal human needs. Water access remains a critical issue in many parts of the world today, including the modern Middle East. The ingenuity shown by Jerusalem's ancient inhabitants in solving this fundamental challenge speaks to a continuous thread of human innovation in response to environmental constraints. The silent stones of these ancient tunnels connect us not just to the specific history of this place, but to the broader story of human adaptation and survival. The warren of passages, chambers, and shafts also illustrates how underground Jerusalem developed, not according to a single master plan, but through incremental solutions to immediate problems. Each generation faced the challenge of water access anew, modifying what they inherited according to their needs, resources, and understanding. This organic, adaptive approach characterizes much of Jerusalem's subterranean development. Layers of solutions built upon and sometimes contradicting earlier ones, creating a complex three-dimensional puzzle for modern archaeologists to unravel. As we continue our journey through Jerusalem's underground world, these ancient water systems remind us that beneath the grand narratives of kings, conquerors, and religious transformations lies a more fundamental story of human beings meeting basic needs through collective effort and ingenuity. The cool passages of Warren's shaft, with their rough-hewn walls and echoing acoustics, connect us directly to the daily realities of life in Jerusalem's earliest periods. The water carriers, the engineers, the defenders who depended on these hidden pathways for their very survival. Their solution to the universal challenge of water security created an underground legacy that continues to astonish visitors more than 3 millennia later. As we leave the rough-hewn passages of the Warren's shaft system, our underground journey brings us to another remarkable water channel, the Siloam Tunnel, also known as Hezekiah's Tunnel, which we touched upon earlier. This time, however, we focus not just on the tunnel itself, but on one of the most significant ancient Hebrew inscriptions ever discovered, the Siloam inscription. Carved into the tunnel wall approximately 19 feet from the Siloam pool outlet, this text provides a rare direct account from the workers who created this engineering marvel in the late 8th century BC. This ancient text offers a voice from the past that speaks directly to us across nearly 3 millennia, describing in the workers' own words the moment when two tunneling teams, working from opposite ends, finally met beneath Jerusalem's hills. The Siloam inscription itself is no longer in the tunnel. It was cut from the wall in 1880 and eventually found its way to the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, where it remains today. But standing at the spot where it once existed, you can almost hear the excitement in the ancient words that were carved here. The tunneling was completed, while the stone cutters were wielding their axes, each man toward his fellow. There was heard a man's voice calling to his fellow. The stone cutters hacked toward each other, axe against axe, and the water flowed from the spring to the pool, a distance of 200 cubits. These words capture a moment of a triumph, the successful completion of an extraordinary engineering project undertaken during a time of great danger. King Hezekiah of Judah, facing the threat of Assyrian invasion, had ordered this tunnel constructed to secure Jerusalem's water supply by channeling the Gihon Springs waters to the pool of Siloam within the city walls. The inscription doesn't mention the king or political circumstances, focusing instead on the technical achievement and human experience of the workers themselves, their labor, communication, and the moment of breakthrough when two teams, working in darkness with rudimentary tools, somehow managed to meet in the middle of a solid limestone hill. The tunnel itself represents a remarkable feat of ancient engineering. Stretching for approximately 750 feet through solid rock, it follows a winding S-shaped path from the Gihon Spring to the Pool of Siloam. The circuitous route has long puzzled scholars. Why not dig a straight line, which would have been shorter and seemingly more efficient? Recent geological research suggests the tunnel follows natural fissures in the limestone, areas where the rock was slightly softer and easier to excavate with the bronze tools available at the time. This represents a sophisticated understanding of the local geology and an efficient approach to a daunting engineering challenge. Walking through the tunnel today, as many visitors to Jerusalem do, offers a direct physical connection to this ancient achievement. The passage is narrow, typically between 1 and 2 feet wide, and varies in height from less than 5 feet to nearly 18 feet in some sections. Water still flows along the channel, typically reaching mid-calf to knee height, its cool touch against your legs a tactile link to those ancient workers who first diverted the Gihon's waters through this human-made passage. The temperature remains constant year-round, and the acoustics create a distinctive environment where water sounds are amplified and transformed by the stone surroundings. The technical challenge of ensuring that two teams digging from opposite ends would meet successfully cannot be overstated. Without modern surveying equipment or even basic compasses, the ancient engineers relied on sound, surface markers, and perhaps even the nature of the rock itself to guide their progress. That they managed to connect the tunnels with only a slight offset is remarkable. At the meeting point, you can still see where the two tunneling directions didn't perfectly align, but required a small adjustment to connect. This slight imperfection humanizes the achievement, reminding us that this was the work of people using simple tools and direct observation rather than precise mechanical instruments. The carving techniques visible in the tunnel walls tell us much about how the work was accomplished. Chisel marks show that the workers typically advanced by cutting vertical grooves into the limestone face, then breaking out the stone between these grooves. In some sections, the ceiling was cut first, creating a pilot tunnel that was later expanded downward, a technique that allowed for better control of the tunnel's gradient to ensure water would flow properly. Different sections show slightly different cutting patterns, likely reflecting the work of different teams or adaptations to varying rock conditions. The gradient of the tunnel is particularly impressive from an engineering perspective. Over its entire length, the tunnel drops in elevation by only about 30 centimeters, approximately 1 foot, creating a gentle but consistent slope that allows water to flow at a manageable rate. This subtle inclination represents precise planning and execution, especially considering the winding path and the challenge of coordinating between two teams working from opposite directions. Modern measurements have confirmed that this gradient is remarkably consistent throughout most of the tunnel's length. Archaeological evidence suggests that the tunnel was excavated during a relatively short period, possibly just a few years. This urgency would align with the historical context, Hezekiah preparing Jerusalem for an anticipated Assyrian siege, which indeed came in 701 BCE under King Sennacherib. The biblical account in 2 Kings and the 2 Chronicles mentions Hezekiah's water projects as part of his defensive preparations, and archaeological findings, including the Siloam inscription itself, provide rare direct correlation between textual records and physical evidence from this period. The inscription itself represents one of the most important examples of ancient Hebrew writing, providing valuable linguistic information about the development of the Hebrew language during the First Temple period. Written in Paleo-Hebrew script, its language is remarkably similar to Biblical Hebrew, offering scholars important comparative material for understanding the development of religious and literary texts from this period. That it records a civil engineering achievement rather than a royal or religious proclamation makes it particularly valuable as evidence of everyday writing and technical communication. The tunnel has yielded other archaeological insights beyond the inscription itself. Scientific analysis of plaster from the tunnel has provided material for radiocarbon dating that supports the 8th century BCE timeframe traditionally associated with Hezekiah's reign. The water itself has been studied for its mineral content and flow patterns, offering information about ancient Jerusalem's hydrology. Even the silt deposits at the bottom of the tunnel contain microfossils and other materials that help reconstruct the environmental conditions of ancient Jerusalem. For the people of ancient Jerusalem, this tunnel represented more than just practical infrastructure. It was likely seen as evidence of divine favor and protection. The successful completion of such a challenging project, providing secure water during a threatening siege, would have been interpreted within the religious and cultural framework of the time. Water in arid environments has always carried profound symbolic meaning, and the channeling of the Gihon Springs waters, a name with biblical associations to one of the rivers of Eden, through human innovation, would have resonated on multiple levels for the ancient inhabitants. The Siloam Tunnel also provides important context for understanding Jerusalem's complex historical geography. The fact that the original city, the City of David, was located on the eastern ridge, with the spring emerging on its eastern slope, but the tunnel carrying water to the western side, helps scholars reconstruct settlement patterns and urban development during this crucial period. The substantial investment required to create this water system indicates the importance of securing the western approaches to the city, suggesting expansion and development in that direction during the Hezekiah's reign. What makes this ancient engineering achievement particularly remarkable is its enduring functionality. For nearly 3,000 years, the tunnel has continued to serve its purpose, carrying water from the Gihon Spring to the Pool of Siloam. Few human constructions can claim such longevity of practical use. While modern Jerusalem no longer depends on this water source for survival, the fact that the tunnel still functions exactly as designed by those ancient engineers creates a direct link between their world and ours. The water flowing today follows precisely the path they created, with bronze chisels and human determination. As we continue our exploration of Jerusalem's underground world, the Siloam Tunnel and its inscription remind us that beneath the grand religious narratives and political conflicts often associated with this city lies evidence of practical human ingenuity and cooperation. The workers who carved this passage through solid rock and who took the time to commemorate their achievement with the Siloam inscription speak to us across time about the universal human capacity for problem solving, technical innovation, and pride in collective accomplishment. Their underground legacy continues to flow quietly beneath Jerusalem's hills, connecting us physically and imaginatively to those who shaped this ancient city's destiny through their labor in the darkness. From the remarkable engineering achievement of Hezekiah's tunnel, our underground journey now takes us to spaces created for more desperate circumstances. The secret escape routes and refugee chambers that honeycomb parts of Jerusalem's subterranean landscape. Throughout the city's tumultuous history, its inhabitants repeatedly faced existential threats that drove them underground, not for daily functions like water collection or storage, but for survival itself. These hidden passages and chambers, dating from various periods, but particularly associated with the first Jewish revolt against Rome, 66-73 CE, and the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132-135 CE, tell stories of resistance, desperation, and the human will to survive against overwhelming odds. Unlike the water tunnels and grand architectural spaces we've explored previously, these escape routes and refuge chambers have a distinctly different emotional quality. There is something profoundly moving about standing in spaces where people once hid in fear, listening for the footsteps of enemies above, perhaps whispering prayers or comforting frightened children in the darkness. These are not spaces of civic pride or religious grandeur, but of human vulnerability and resilience. The rough walls, narrow passages, and hidden entrances speak to urgent creation, under threat rather than careful planning and execution over generations. Imagine entering one of these refuge systems, perhaps through a concealed opening in what appears to be an ordinary cistern or storage room. The entrance might be deliberately small and awkwardly positioned, designed to be easily defended or quickly concealed. Once inside, you would find yourself in a network of chambers and passages quite different from the water systems or grand halls we've previously explored. These spaces were designed for concealment rather than comfort, for temporary survival rather than daily function. Low ceilings, narrow passages, and minimal ventilation characterize many of these refugee complexes, reflecting their purpose as emergency shelters rather than regular habitation. The most extensive and well documented of these underground refugee systems date from the period of the Bar Kokhba revolt, when Jewish rebels led by Simon Bar Kokhba fought against Roman imperial forces under Emperor Hadrian. After the devastating defeat of the first Jewish revolt and the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, this second major uprising represented a last desperate attempt to regain Jewish sovereignty in Judea. When the rebellion began to fail, many Jews created elaborate underground hideouts where they could escape the Roman legions who methodically suppressed the revolt with overwhelming force. Archaeological excavations throughout the Judean hills have revealed hundreds of these refugee complexes, with significant examples in and around Jerusalem. They typically include multiple chambers connected by narrow passages, often with defensive features like hidden entrances, maze-like layouts to confuse pursuers, and strategic constriction points where defenders could block advancing enemies. Some incorporated existing natural caves or earlier human-made structures like cisterns, while others were freshly excavated under the pressure of imminent danger. The archaeological evidence found within these spaces tells poignant stories of their use. Oil lamps, cooking vessels, storage jars for food and water, and personal items like combs and spindle whorls indicate that entire families sought shelter in these underground refuges. Some chambers show evidence of having been used for basic daily activities. Cooking areas, sleeping spaces, even rudimentary sanitation arrangements. These were not merely places to hide briefly during an attack, but underground dwellings where people might remain for extended periods while danger persisted above. Perhaps most moving are the artifacts that speak to how people maintained their cultural and religious identity, even in these desperate circumstances. Ritual baths, mikvahs, have been found in some larger refuge complexes, indicating that religious observance continued despite the crisis. Written materials, including letters and documents relating to the Bar Kokhba administration, have been recovered from some hideout systems in the Judean desert, showing that even underground, people maintained social organization and communication networks. These weren't just physical refugees, but spaces where a threatened culture sought to preserve itself. The engineering of these spaces, while less sophisticated than the water tunnels or grand architectural works we've explored, nonetheless demonstrates considerable skill and knowledge. The builders understood principles of structural stability, ensuring that their excavations wouldn't collapse under the weight of structures above. They created ventilation systems, sometimes disguised on the surface as innocent landscape features, to provide breathable air in deeply buried chambers. They incorporated water storage or access to existing water systems, recognizing that a refuge without water quickly becomes a tomb rather than a sanctuary. The acoustic properties of these spaces would have been critically important to their function. Those hiding needed to be able to hear movement above that might signal danger, while ensuring that their own sounds wouldn't travel to the surface and reveal their location. Some chambers show evidence of acoustic baffling, arrangements of passages and openings designed to minimize sound transmission. Communicating between chambers would have required careful systems of whispers, taps, or other signals that wouldn't carry beyond the refuge. This awareness of sound and its management represents another dimension of the ingenuity applied to these survival spaces. The psychological aspect of these underground refuges is difficult to fully comprehend from our modern perspective. Imagine the experience of families crowded into dark, confined spaces, knowing that discovery might mean death, listening to the sounds of destruction above as homes and communities were razed by Roman forces. The claustrophobic conditions, limited resources, uncertainty about how long they would need to remain hidden, and constant fear of discovery would have created enormous stress. Yet archaeological evidence shows that people organized these spaces, maintained order, and in some cases survived for considerable periods under these conditions. The fate of many who sought shelter in these underground spaces was ultimately tragic. Roman forces developed techniques for finding and breaching these hideouts, sometimes using smoke to force occupants out, other times breaking through from above or blocking exits to trap those within. The historical record and archaeological evidence indicate that while some managed to survive by hiding underground, many others were captured or killed when their refuges were discovered. The Bar Kokhba revolt ended in devastating defeat with massive casualties and the Roman decision to rename Judea as Syria Palestina in an attempt to erase its Jewish identity. Not all of Jerusalem's underground escape routes and refugee chambers date from the Roman period. Throughout the city's long history of sieges, conquests, and conflicts, its inhabitants repeatedly created hidden passages and secret rooms for emergency use. Crusader structures sometimes incorporated escape tunnels leading beyond city walls. Ottoman period houses occasionally included hidden chambers where valuables or people could be concealed during periods of unrest. Even during the 1948 War of Independence, underground spaces were repurposed as bunkers and evacuation routes. This recurring pattern speaks to Jerusalem's continuous experience of conflict and the human instinct to seek safety below ground when danger threatens above. One of the most remarkable aspects of these refuge systems is how they demonstrate the detailed knowledge their creators had of the subsurface environment. They understood which rock layers could be safely excavated, where natural fissures might provide starting points for tunnels, how to manage groundwater issues, and where to create ventilation shafts that wouldn't be easily noticed from above. This intimate familiarity with the underground landscape represented knowledge passed down through generations, combining practical experience with oral tradition about earlier excavations and natural features. The spiritual dimension of these refugee spaces should not be overlooked. For people whose religious identity was often the very reason they faced persecution, these underground chambers sometimes became impromptu sacred spaces, places where prayers were whispered, religious texts studied by lamplight, and rituals maintained despite the circumstances. Some refugee complexes include small niches that may have held religious items or served as focal points for prayer. The act of maintaining religious practice underground, when temples and synagogues above had been destroyed, represented a profound form of spiritual resistance to those seeking to eradicate not just a population, but a culture and belief system. As we continue our journey through Jerusalem's underground world, these secret escape routes and refuge chambers represent perhaps the most emotionally charged spaces we encounter. They remind us that beneath the grand historical narratives of emperors, kings, and conquests lies the more intimate history of ordinary people facing extraordinary threats. Families seeking shelter, communities trying to preserve their way of life, individuals making desperate choices in the face of overwhelming force. The silence in these chambers today invites us to remember those who once huddled here in darkness, their fears and hopes still somehow present in the very stones that sheltered them. As our journey through Jerusalem's underground world draws toward its conclusion, we find ourselves contemplating not a single type of subterranean space, but the remarkable accumulation of all we have explored, the comprehensive archaeological strata that reveal 3,000 years of continuous human habitation, all preserved in stone beneath the living city. Jerusalem is unique in how completely it encapsulates this vertical history, where walking downward through excavated layers is quite literally walking backward through time. Each layer, each stone, each human-made space holds within it stories of the people who shaped this city, their beliefs, their struggles, their daily lives, all compressed into a three-dimensional historical record of extraordinary richness and complexity. Standing now in an archaeological excavation that cuts through multiple historical periods, you might place your hand against a Byzantine wall built atop Roman foundations that themselves rest on Hasmonean structures, with Herodian modifications visible to one side and Ottoman repairs apparent above. This physical compression of time into space creates a unique experience where history isn't simply read or viewed but physically encountered. The cool touch of stones worked by hands that lived hundreds or thousands of years apart connects you directly to the human continuity that defines Jerusalem's unique character. The archaeological strata of Jerusalem reveal a pattern of building upon building that differs from many other ancient cities. Rather than completely demolishing earlier structures before new construction, Jerusalem's inhabitants frequently built directly on top of existing foundations, incorporated earlier walls into new buildings, or filled in older spaces to create platforms for new development. This pattern was partly dictated by the city's challenging topography, built across hills and valleys. Jerusalem required significant terracing and foundation work for any major construction. Reusing existing structures saved tremendous labor while providing stable foundations already tested by time. This layering process was also influenced by Jerusalem's symbolic importance to multiple religious and cultural traditions. Each new power that controlled the city often sought to build upon rather than erase what came before, sometimes as a practical matter, sometimes as a deliberate act of appropriation or connection to the site's earlier significance. A Byzantine church might rise atop a Roman temple that itself had replaced an earlier Israelite structure, each new layer acknowledging the sacred nature of the location while reinterpreting it according to new beliefs. This physical palimpsest mirrors the textual and traditional layering that characterizes Jerusalem's spiritual significance. The stones themselves tell stories through their cut, their placement, their wear patterns, and the marks they bear. Different historical periods had distinctive masonry techniques that archaeologists can identify at a glance. Herodian stones with their characteristic drafted margins and slightly raised centers. Roman ashlar blocks with their precise rectangular cutting. Byzantine stones often reused from earlier structures. Crusader masonry with its distinctive diagonal tooling marks. Ottoman blocks with their particular proportions and finishing. All these create a visual lexicon of Jerusalem's architectural history that can be read by those who know the language of stone. Walking through Jerusalem's archaeological excavations, you encounter distinctive signature layers that mark major historical transitions. A layer of ash and destruction debris from the Babylonian conquest in 586 BCE, the massive architectural remains from Herod's ambitious building programs, evidence of the Roman destruction in 70 CE, earthquake damage from the major seismic event of 749 CE, Crusader modifications following their conquest in 1099, Mamluk reconstructions after recapturing the city in 1187, Ottoman developments beginning in 1517. These and many other key moments in Jerusalem's history left physical signatures in the stone record that archaeologists have painstakingly identified and documented. Beyond these major historical transitions, the accumulated layers reveal the texture of daily life across millennia. A Roman period shop floor still bears the wear marks where customers once stood at a counter. A Byzantine mosaic shows patterns of foot traffic that gradually wore down certain areas. A Mamluk period courtyard contains a stone bench polished by generations of people who sat in the same spot. An Ottoman era doorway has a depression worn into its threshold by countless footsteps. These quiet, intimate traces of human presence connect us emotionally to those who moved through these same spaces in centuries past. The material culture embedded within these layers provides windows into the lives of Jerusalem's inhabitants throughout its history. Cooking pots, oil lamps, coins, jewelry, tools, toys, writing implements, religious objects, the detritus of daily life became sealed within archaeological layers, preserved for future discovery. These artifacts tell stories that written records often omit: how ordinary people cooked their food, lit their homes, adorned themselves, played games, conducted business, and practiced their faiths. They provide texture and intimacy to our understanding of the past, complementing the grand historical narratives with glimpses of individual lives. Jerusalem's underground layers also reveal how the city's relationship with its environment has evolved over time. Early water systems show a direct engagement with natural springs and rainfall patterns. Later periods demonstrate increasingly sophisticated approaches to water management. Aqueducts bringing water from distant sources, massive cisterns storing winter rains for summer use, drainage systems preventing flood damage. These hydraulic systems represent not just technological evolution, but changing conceptions of how humans might modify their environment to support urban life in a challenging semi-arid setting. The different cultural influences visible in Jerusalem's archaeological strata speak to its position at the crossroads of civilizations. Egyptian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Islamic Crusader, and Ottoman elements all appear in the material record, sometimes in fascinating combinations that demonstrate cultural exchange and adaptation. A Byzantine lamp might show Persian decorative influences. An Islamic period dwelling might incorporate architectural elements from the Crusader era. A Jewish ritual bath might use Roman hydraulic techniques. These hybrid forms remind us that despite narratives of conflict and succession, Jerusalem's reality was often one of cultural conversation and mutual influence. The continuous thread of religious significance runs through all these layers, though expressed in different forms across time. From early Israelite ritual objects to Second Temple period ritual baths, from Byzantine church foundations to Islamic prayer niches, from Crusader chapels to Ottoman charitable foundations. The material evidence of faith appears throughout Jerusalem's archaeological record. These physical expressions of belief often show both continuity and transformation. As sacred, spaces were reinterpreted according to new understandings while maintaining connections to their earlier significance. For archaeologists and historians, Jerusalem presents both extraordinary opportunities and unique challenges. The richness of its archaeological record offers unparalleled insights into 3 millennia of urban development, religious practice, and daily life. Yet this very richness, combined with the city's continuing significance to living religious traditions and contemporary political contexts, makes excavation and interpretation complex endeavors requiring sensitivity to multiple perspectives and claims. Each stone uncovered may be simultaneously evidence for scholarly study, connection to cultural heritage, affirmation of religious narrative, and element in political discourse. The process by which Jerusalem's underground world has been revealed over the past century and a half represents its own fascinating chapter in the city's history. From early explorers like Edward Robinson, Charles Wilson, and Charles Warren in the 19th century, to modern archaeological projects using advanced technologies, each generation has approached Jerusalem's buried past with the questions, techniques, and perspectives of their time. The history of archaeology in Jerusalem is itself layered, with earlier excavations now forming part of the archaeological record that newer investigations must interpret. What makes Jerusalem's underground world particularly remarkable is not just its individual components, impressive though they are, but the comprehensive way it encapsulates human experience across time. From the most basic needs for water and security to the most profound expressions of spiritual longing, from the practical concerns of commerce to the grand visions of imperial builders, from moments of destruction to periods of flourishing creativity, all are preserved in stone beneath the streets of the modern city. This physical compression of human history creates a unique place where the past is not distant but immediately present, not abstract but tangibly real. As our journey through Jerusalem's subterranean landscape comes to a close, we carry with us images and impressions of spaces shaped by human hands across thousands of years. The rough-hewn water tunnels of the pre-Davidic city, the massive quarries where temple stones were cut, the hidden Hasmonean passages connecting centers of power, the grand Roman street now buried 40 feet below the modern city, the vast Byzantine cisterns that stored precious water, the sturdy Crusader halls now lying beneath medieval markets, the practical Ottoman passages serving the spice merchants, the western wall tunnels revealing the full extent of Herod's magnificent construction, the ancient engineering achievement recorded in the Siloam inscription, the poignant refuge chambers where families hid in desperate times. Each of these underground spaces represents a chapter in Jerusalem's continuing story, a story written not primarily in text but in stone, stone shaped by human hands, stone bearing the marks of human purpose, stone witnessing human history in all its complexity. As we return to the surface world, to the living city that continues to add its own layer to this vertical history, we carry with us a deeper appreciation for how completely the present rests upon the accumulated past, how thoroughly contemporary Jerusalem is supported by the silent stone passages that have sheltered, served, and sustained countless generations in this most layered of cities.